Welcome to Spark and Scale, the show for higher ed leaders learning, experimenting, and evolving how we shape our future. I'm your host, Mickey Baines. Come and join me. It's time to get started. I'm seeing a shift in higher ed, a shift where folks are moving further away from we're thinking about AI or studying AI to actually embracing and starting to use AI. But one of the things that's not really changed is this set of questions that leaders are wrestling with. Questions like, where do we start? Which tools really matter? What use cases actually make our lives better for us, meaning our staff, our colleagues, our faculty, and our students? Which use cases bring the best return on the investment of time and resources that we put into using AI? That's what today's episode's all about. It's about real stories of AI, how it's being used, not glossy, perfect world uses, but real uses of how colleges are using it to help them work smarter, to work faster, to work better. Now, if you're new to Spark and Scale, first, welcome to the show. Here, I like to take us places where we dig into ideas that create momentum, sparks that lead to lasting change. I'm your host, Mickey Baines, and I spend my days helping colleges implement technology, rethink, and build strategy to simplify how they serve students and to help them lead teams that can actually stick with the changes that they need to make. Now, in this episode, we're going to look at institutions and how they're using AI on two different levels. We're going to start at the top at some of the easier use cases, looking at how leaders, not just staff across campus, we're talking about leaders, how they're using prompting tools, the tools that we know most, the Chat GPTs, Copilot, Gemini, Claude, Perplexity, all those tools, how they're using those with prompting to make faster and clearer decisions. And then we're going to skip a bit and work to the frontline teams and see how institutions are using automation and AI assistance to remove friction for their students across the enrollment process. So let's start at the top, because the story of AI in higher ed isn't just about new tools. It's about how leaders at the top are using it to think differently, to cut through the noise, to see the data they need to see in front of them, to lead with better information. When leadership gets curious and they start prompting for themselves, that single behavior, that's what changes. That's how the institution itself begins to learn and work with AI. And let me dive in a bit and share more. So I'm going to look at the University of South Florida. And by the way, I have links in the show notes that will take you to articles talking about each of these use cases. So I'm not just pulling them out of the air or researching myself and presenting it. I'll give you the links to that because you'll see quotes and you'll see more details about each of them. This is just a good overview. So University of South Florida, they gave their faculty and staff access to their key AI operator. And I believe in this case, it was Copilot. And they started to using it in a way a lot of us are already using. So this is not brand new. This is not going to be novel, but stay with me because this is important. They allow their teams to start using it within their meetings, to record meetings. So whether you're using Copilot or Fathom or Zoom or whatever your notes recording tool is, know that you can use it the same way that South Florida is. So they brought it into meetings to allow it to capture their meetings, to produce the meeting notes, to produce the action items, the to-dos, all of those things. Now, let's talk about why that's important. First off, let's talk about the meeting itself. If we don't have a human taking the minutes themselves, maybe that you have a human in there who doesn't need to be in there. They're only in there to take notes. Now you can send them back to do the work they're supposed to be doing that they can do. But let's say they're part of the committee. Now they can put their pencil down and not just take notes. They can fully engage. And this matters for everyone a part of that meeting. You can turn off the keyboard or email or other notes tool. You can put down the pen and paper and you can listen and engage and participate in the meeting. That's really important. Yes, you may need to pause and write down a question you want to ask in that moment so you don't forget it, but you're able to really participate. And then you can finish, whether it's a 60-minute meeting, a 90-minute meeting, a strategy meeting, a budget meeting, something big, you can finish it, walk out, not have to wait a long period of time before you get the notes from somebody else who wrote them down and had to type them and edit them and send it up. You get them all. You get your to-dos. You know what you need to do. You know what your team needs to do. You know when they need to do it, and you can communicate that right away before you forget and it drops further down on your to-do list. How often does this happen? I was supposed to bring that to this meeting. I thought you were going to do that. All that confusion gone because the AI will capture that. And what this really does, it ensures more people are following through. It helps us build clearer accountability and those fewer lost in translation moments in the meetings. I think that's a powerful use case. Again, it's not new, but when you build that habit across every department, across every committee, think about what will be covered. And that's a key lesson that I want you to take away from this use case. It's building the habit of doing it that way that will really matter. That's what leadership adoption looks like. It's not new software. It's a new discipline. Using AI right after a meeting, it forces clarity, it forces accountability, and it adds speed to action. We're talking about ROI a lot with AI. What can it do? What's the benefit? Think about the speed here, speed to action. And that's actually where we're going to talk about in this next one. So we're going to look at Carnegie Mellon. Again, they were using prompting tools there. I think they were using a combination maybe of Copilot and Gemini here. And what they were doing is taking massive sets of data, these large spreadsheets or multiple spreadsheets. They're taking policy documents. They're taking governance documents and other type of documents they have to combine with the spreadsheet to start running analysis. And so at a senior level, when we need to make key leadership decisions that impact multiple people across campus, that impact the institution as a whole, a lot of times what I've seen in the past is you've got a big decision, you got a lot of data. So I don't have all this data unless have IR. IR needs to go collect the data, run this analysis for us, bring it back. That way we can make a decision. What happens in those moments is you're not making a decision in the moment. That's clear. But then you might be waiting a week or 2 weeks, potentially longer, to get the information you need to then make a decision. And what we're doing now is we're injecting AI into that role to give it the information and working with prompting to help give us the analysis that we need. When leaders can take these complex data and turn it quickly into, decision-ready language, the conversation will shift from what's happening to what should we do. And so you're making that shift. You're skipping a step, that waiting period of 1, 2, or 3 weeks, so you can start making decisions much faster. And that's where leadership really creates momentum. And what I really love about South Florida and Carnegie Mellon here is, AI didn't come in and start as a project. It started as a practice. Leaders practice prompting. They built their prompting skills until it became a habit. And once that habit forms at the top, it gives everyone else around campus permission to explore what AI might do in their own work. So they can avoid the fear, where they might hide AI, or the fear and reluctance to even log in and try it. They're seeing it on top, they're seeing it being adopted there, and it gives them more confidence, and it gives them permission to experiment for themselves. Now, what happens when we take that mindset and we move it from the conference room to the front lines, where students, where advisors, counselors, coaches, where they actually feel the impact? And that's what we're going to jump into next. So we're going to talk now a bit about how AI can help you remove friction and scale your ability to support students. And if you've paid attention to any use cases that come across your desk in email, a lot of it's marketing related, so keep that in mind. But when you see that, you'll see a lot of use cases around scaling support. But I'm going to give you 2 good use cases to consider. And we're going to start here. We're going to look at one from a single university that zoomed in, and I mean zoomed in on every student, looking at the support that they needed, looking at the support they received, and they were able to track that at a very micro scale, a 1-to-1 scale. And then we're going to shift and look at a state, not an institution, a state system that scaled that same idea to hundreds of thousands of students. So let's start with Georgia State. Again, I'm going to call this the micro-level friction reduction. So again, you'll see notes about these and some articles referencing these in the show notes here. So what Georgia State did was they built an agent. They were using at the time, in fact, it's probably called an assistant at the time because they did this a few years ago. They were using Mainstay, formerly known as AdmitHub, and they took the tool, they mapped out their enrollment process and looked at every pre-enrollment task, from the FAFSA submission, immunizations and orientation, housing, all of those things, and created a checklist with the CRM and their SIS, and then connected that with Mainstay. So that when a student stalled on a task, their agent or their assistant was able to nudge them on only that item. And we talk about this in our CRM work all the time at Kennedy Company, where I work, where it's not nudging them, here are the 5 things that need to be done. It's, here's the one thing that you need to do today, or one thing you need to do this week. It was able to give them that nudge. And if the students had questions, it was able to give answers to the question to help them get through the process. And when that question was too complex, it routed the question to an appropriate admission counselor who was able to give them a personal reply. Staff could then take all that information and feed all the new questions back into that knowledge base where AI was pulling its information from, so it kept learning. And this is where you start to see results on the impact, right? So Georgia State saw about a 21% reduction in summer melt. Now, I don't know what your melt looks like, but imagine reducing that melt by 20%. That likely paid for that first year of AI alone. For them, that 20% reduction, that was about 300 additional first-year students. 300 additional students because they reduced melt with this tool. This isn't about replacing counselors, because that's one of the fears we see on staff when you're using an agent like that. This isn't about replacing staff. It's about allowing the staff to increase their time, because we're taking 10% of the work. All of those use cases are those questions, those emails, those calls that are coming in. We're taking off the desk, so now they can take the time to answer the complex questions with complex answers, with real answers, in-depth answers that help solve problems, not just answer the question. I used to say that a lot in our training as we were working with folks. Don't answer the question, solve the problem, because those very often are 2 different things. And it's very hard for staff to truly solve the problem when they don't have the time. When we take these steps and take these easy ones off, the ones where the question is, where the problem is the question, just answer that, get out of the way. And now I can take your complex question that's a real problem and solve the problem. So we're going to talk about the state of Texas, where across their 2-year community and technical college system, they leveraged very similar. This is with the Texas Higher Ed Coordinating Board, the THECB, and the Texas College Access Network. They built a virtual advisor that texted students who are applying through ApplyTexas. ApplyTexas is kind of like their common app across the state. And what it did was it allowed students to get answers to questions 24/7 about FAFSA, about housing and orientation, about escalating those same complex issues to advisors from the College Advising Corps. Now, those human interactions, again, just like at Georgia State, were fed right back in, which allowed them to get better information and improve the answers going down the road. Now, what was really interesting to see is, within a couple of years, they were seeing over 200,000 students leveraging this tool to increase the rate through which they were completing applications and submitting the FAFSA completely. And even after that, I think, to me, this is probably more impressive. 200,000 is a lot. Yes, but it's Texas. Everything's bigger in Texas. But one of the things that really stood out to me is they actually saw the tool was being used by more than 700 high school counselors. Think about that. Now, as a former enrollment manager, I always wanted all the counselors we worked with, I wanted them to think of my institution first above all others. And to know that across the state, over 700 counselors are now using this tool, that's taking work off your plate. That's helping them get the easy answers so they can give those same answers to students. That, to me, is a big win. Now, with these use cases, again, these aren't brand new, but what happens when you're looking at a use case like this, where you're using these agents to answer questions, what I find in our work, and this is a big takeaway, when our clients have been doing the prompting side of this first before they get into these use cases, they're more prepared. They can jump to action faster, provide deeper information and guidance and requirements to us, so that when we're helping build it, if you need somebody to help you build it and you're using a firm like Kennedy Company, but when we're helping them build it, we can get to what really needs to be built faster from this. That's a real key thing when you start at this prompting level. Just that experience and practice and understanding of how it's working, that helps you improve what you're putting out for students. Georgia State, they're showing what's possible when a campus builds around the student. Texas is showing what happens when an entire state treats that same approach as a shared service. What they're doing is they're removing friction. And when we think about admissions and enrollment, or if you think outside of higher ed, you think about sales, one of the key things I hear people talking about a lot is how do we remove the friction? But they're not just removing friction, they're removing friction in a way that's measurable, in a way that's solvable, so that you get real-time data, that you can learn from that data and continue to apply it and improve upon what you're doing as you remove that friction. And I think that really brings us full circle. Each of these institutions started by asking better questions about how they work, not what they could buy. At South Florida and Carnegie Mellon, leaders use prompting to clear the fog around decisions, to see the patterns and the possibilities faster. And at Georgia State and Texas, teams used AI to remove friction, to make it easier for students to say yes. That's the key here, letting students say yes, and to stay connected once they did. Together, they choose something simple but powerful. AI doesn't change higher ed when we automate it. It changes when we humanize it, when we use it to give people time back, context back, to give them focus back, to do the work that they want to do. If you're leading a team right now, my advice, start small. Start where you make decisions or where your students hit the most friction. Ask yourself, ask your team, what would it look like to use AI to make this one thing clearer, to make this one thing faster, or one thing easier? That's where sparks start, and that's how they scale. Thanks for joining me on Spark and Scale. I hope these stories spark ideas for your own work and provide a little courage so that you can try them. I'm your host, Mickey Baines. Let's keep building smarter, simpler ways to serve students and to lead our institutions. Thank you for watching and listening, and I'll see you next time.